a disabled woman dies under care of EMTs and the family can't sue. The details on this one, the estate of Timesha Beauchamp, 20-year-old woman with cerebral palsy, filed a federal lawsuit after she was declared deceased by first responders in Southfield, Michigan, and placed in a body bag despite not actually being dead. However, a court just ruled July 26, the EMTs were immune from civil prosecution. I mean, I take that to mean no matter what they do, you can't sue, you can't recover. There's more. Beauchamp pronounced dead August 23rd, 2020 at her residence by EMTs after they ended life-saving procedures when they noticed no signs of life. First responders arrived on the scene 20 minutes after Beauchamp's mother, Erica Lattimore, found her unresponsive in her bedroom. Atlanta Black Star with the reporting. At approximately 8 a.m., the EMTs stopped performing CPR. They pronounced her dead, according to Courthouse News Service. However, family members noticed her chest moving and claimed that she still had a pulse. But the paramedics claimed that Beauchamp's chest movements and pulse were a result of her body reacting to medications and not signs of life. Now, the lawsuit named the first responders as Michael Storm, Scott Ricard, Philip Mulligan, and Jake Kroll, okay? The lawsuit additionally read, they also called a doctor to obtain permission to stop trying to resuscitate Beauchamp, although they had already stopped resuscitative efforts more than 5 minutes before receiving such permission. Now, Beauchamp's nurse and godmother, Savannah Spears, told WXYZ TV Detroit Channel 7, she felt a pulse after the EMTs pronounced her dead. It was faint, but I felt a pulse. I've been a nurse for 38 years and I kind of know when there's a pulse and when there's not. Beauchamp was put inside a body bag, taken to a funeral home by an employee of the mortuary. 3 hours later, the embalmer opened the body bag and found Beauchamp with her eyes wide open and gasping for breath. She was rushed to the hospital, placed on a ventilator, and she died of an anoxic brain injury, October 18th, 2020. According to the Detroit Free Press, the 4 EMTs were placed on leave and the family filed a lawsuit against the 4 EMTs and the city of Southfield, claiming they violated the 20-year-old's civil rights by being deliberately indifferent to her serious medical need and treatment that resulted in a private act of violence. US Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit ruled first responders were immune from the $50 million lawsuit, that the EMTs had qualified immunity from the estate's constitutional claims. Qualified immunity protects government officials from constitutional rights, liability, and civil lawsuits unless it can be proved that they violated clearly established law, which in practice has meant, wow, it's just incredible to read this. In practice, it has meant violations that are almost factually identical to previous misconduct instances that courts have ruled were unconstitutional. Now, the judge in this case, her name, Julia Gibbons, US Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit. She wrote, it is hard to see how it could be clearly established that the first responders exposed Beauchamp to a private act of violence when they mistakenly believed she was dead and left her in her family's care to be processed for routine funeral proceedings, which included the funeral home employee's act of putting Beauchamp's presumed dead body into a bag to transport her to a funeral home. Gibbons continued, if anything, the fact that numerous laypersons recognized signs that Beauchamp was still alive suggests that the city could reasonably have expected the first responders not to pronounce Beauchamp dead without special training on this topic. In the same vein, the obvious signs of life Beauchamp displayed also undermine the inference that the first responders would have acted differently had they received more training from the city. David, it's an extraordinary story. I can't think of anything more horrible except I don't know, maybe years ago, I heard this story of someone who was similarly, another place in the country, as I recall, or the world perhaps, placed in a coffin and had fingernail marks on the lid when the body was exhumed. But this is a horrific way to die. I can't imagine that you can't communicate. All of this is going down. The body bag is zipped up over your head, and then stunned, this mortuary worker unzips it to find just an incredible find.
Yeah,
what say you?
This is horrible. This is sickening. This is everything that's wrong with these sort of situations. I can't understand for the life of me, even if the EMTs did not have proper training, even if the EMTs, reliable and some, I don't understand why it's not their protocol to take her to the hospital anyway. I mean, you don't find signs of life. Maybe you don't have the right equipment. After 20 minutes of trying, okay, you think that she's dead, but again, it feels like when you're dealing with somebody who is disabled, there's a extra set of challenges, not only for her family, but also for the doctors and the physicians and the EMTs who are in her care, because it's a different set of medical things that she might provide, as opposed to somebody who's able to sort of talk and normally and all that sort of thing. But the other strike that was unfortunately against her is I sort of feel like maybe because his family was African American, because she's disabled and she's African American, there's a sense among certain responders that, well, her life may be not as important as if we were going to the country club and rescuing a rich white kid who just got unconscious on the tennis court. That is a reality of our society. And I think if we want to change things, not only do we have to change qualified immunity, get rid of qualified immunity, make everybody responsible, but also you got to tell these EMTs every life is precious, to the point that if you're not sure, or if you're in a situation that you haven't felt, you've never seen before, maybe a disabled kid who suddenly is unconscious, you take that person to the hospital, let the hospital use all of their equipment to sort of figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and that's really it for me. And people might say, oh, well, why are you jumping to race, David? But what's it to you? The family was saying, hey, there's something else going on here. What's it to you to make that extra trip, take the patient to the hospital and let them determine if you're gonna call the doctor anyway? So I don't understand it, but I also, and I'm not, I'm just a layperson, not a trained lawyer, but I don't understand the reasoning from this judge. And maybe you're right, it's just the way the law is. But given the other circumstances, family member who said, I'm in the medical field and there's something going on here. Can't a jury hear this? Can't there at least be that threshold?
Yeah, I mean, even if you're saying, well, the EMTs are personally not liable, you can still make the organization of the EMTs, the emergency responders, or the city liable for what happened. And I would think that the city, if it had a conscience in Southfield, Michigan, wherever this happened, that they would say, okay, let's never mind what the courts have ruled. We're still going to give you a private settlement, because clearly there is some responsibility. I think most human beings can agree on people who declare somebody dead who's not dead, and that the suffering that child had to go through, the 20-year-old had to go through for the last several hours of her life is horrifying. So for that alone, you would hope that Southfield, Michigan, the community would do the right thing and say, okay, let's put aside the legalities, the qualified immunity, with all that kind of stuff. Let's settle, let's give her family something to recognize the mistakes that our EMTs made.
Yeah, because it boils down, the judge even tackles, well, even with training, blah, blah, blah. But it really boils down to something very simple. If I'm an EMT and I can't tell when someone's dead or alive, we're not talking about brain dead, okay? Is there a pulse? To me, that says, well, the city can be responsible for, shouldn't you at least have enough training and skill to be able to say with some certainty about that?
Yeah, and look, Southfield, Michigan, that's a pretty wealthy suburb of Detroit. So they have the resources, both in terms of local resources and EMTs and police. They have the resources to make sure their people are trained. And clearly, if they're not trained on how to detect a pulse with somebody who is disabled or presents a different set of medical conditions, the city ought to be retraining them and getting them used to this sort of thing. But again, that's not going to bring back this girl's life. And so for that reason alone, I hope that the family continues their lawsuit and sues the city in general, even if they can't sue the EMTs personally, and that the city does the right thing and acknowledges no human being should ever ever have to go through something like this and die this way. And for that alone, the city ought to try to do something to make amends with the family.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Plus public confidence, as you said, wealthy area, but public confidence, okay, that would be my worst nightmare, or for that to happen to a loved one. So we'll keep following it.